Good afternoon and welcome to the BCO NextGen International Series webinar. For those that don't know me, my name is Christopher Blust and I'm an Associate Director at AKT2 and I sit on the BCO NextGen London and Southeast Committee. As you might know, the BCO's mission is to research, develop and communicate best practice. In the last year, due to COVID-19, restrictions have been placed on travel and large gatherings and conferences. And including the BCO Toronto conference scheduled last year, many of them have been cancelled. And so exposure and insight to international projects and awareness has been reduced in large capacity. To be at the forefront of design, we need to be aware of what our international partners are doing, absorb how those concepts can be adapted to suit our design challenges here in the UK. So to fill this gap in some capacity, we decided to launch an international speaker series to hear about progressive and leading international projects and views. So to launch the series, I want to give a very big welcome to Dominic Bettison, Director at WilkinsonEyre. Dominic was actually engaged to speak at the BCO Toronto conference before it was cancelled. WilkinsonEyre is one of the world's leading architecture practices with a portfolio of national and international award-winning projects. Since their inception in 1983, they have built a wide-ranging portfolio, which includes the Guangzhou International Finance Center, one of the tallest buildings in the world, Singapore's giant cooled conservatories at Gardens by the Bay, and of course, the restoration at Battersea Power Station here in the UK, which I'm sure many of us know. WilkinsonEyre's work is based on an informed use of technology and materials and combines a commitment to the spirit of the new with an awareness of context. This approach has won the practice numerous awards, including the prestigious Reba Lupkin Prize for both the Guangzhou International Finance Center and conservatories at Gardens by the Bay, and the RIBA Sterling Prize for the Gateshead Millennium Bridge and Magna in South Yorkshire. Dominic, who is joining us today, has been involved in the design and construction of many of the practice's key projects, including the design of the 440-meter-high Guangzhou International Finance Center and the 330-meter-high Chai Q Fortune Center in Wuhan. Dominic also founded the Hong Kong practice for WilkinsonEyre in 2012. So we have Dominic here today to speak to us about one of his more recent projects, CIBC Square, which is actually very close to home for me in Toronto, Canada. CIBC Square is a major mixed-use development and transport hub in the heart of Toronto's financial district. The scheme will provide 2.5 million square feet of predominantly office accommodation in twin 250-meter-high office towers positioned on opposite sides of a rail corridor, which are linked at high level by a sky park. The project is being constructed in 2 phases, and the first phase is actually on site and due for completion later this summer. So, not to spoil any more details, I'm going to hand things over to Dominic, but I'd just like to add that our viewers are welcome to share any questions via the chat at the bottom of their screen, which we can then ask Dominic at the end of the presentation. So, over to Dominic to tell us a few things about CIBC Square and maybe a few other things about his international experience. Dominic.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today on the project CIBC. It's a pity we didn't make it to Toronto as planned for obvious reasons. So just to give you a little bit of a summary as to the project, Chris has already mentioned it's effectively twin 250-meter tall towers, grade A office towers, looking to house about 18,000 office workers. It will provide new bus terminal facilities for the City of Toronto. Metrolinx, the Transport Authority, was a key stakeholder in the project. The project also delivers a 1-acre publicly accessible sky park spanning over the live rail corridor into Union Station, and a series of interconnections, path bridges, path connections extend the Toronto pedestrian movement system into our building and out from it, as well as upgrades to the urban realm, and also, crucially important, buildings that are LEED Platinum and WELL Platinum in terms of their assessment, and also wire scored Platinum. The two buildings will be the new headquarters for CIBC Bank, which is one of the big 4 banks in Canada, and as well as CIBC taking 1.65 million square feet in both towers. Microsoft are a key tenant, Metrolinx I've mentioned before, already a partner, and a few other big tenants there. So in terms of the brief to us and ultimately the output of the size of the project divided into 2 towers, 45 Bay, South Tower, and the North Tower at 141 Bay. Each of those providing around 1.75 million square feet, giving a total development of about 3.5 million square feet over the whole project, with a sky park connecting the towers together, with no discernible area at the end of the project.
Once in a generation, a building rises past its peers to set a new standard, changing tomorrow's expectations of design and innovation. Introducing Bay Park Center, a new international standard for office space and the gateway to all the best that Toronto has to offer. With expansive views, stunning architecture, and direct immediate access to Union Station, Bay Park Center is at the epicenter of Toronto's major transit channels and will meet all of your business needs, inside and out. An elevated park designed for collaboration and relaxation connects the towers to each other and to the city beyond. While first-rate amenities and soaring public spaces welcome tenants and visitors to Canada's newest landmark. The office floors above are uniquely planned to optimize layouts and infrastructure, increasing comfort and efficiency throughout. Conceived and developed by global real estate leaders Ivanhoe Cambridge and Hines, with a striking design by British architects WilkinsonEyre, Bay Park Center presents a singular opportunity for the world's most successful companies. And due to its privileged position on the Toronto skyline, you'll never lose your views or your visibility. 81 and 141 Bay Street at Bay Park Center, where tomorrow begins.
Okay, so I thought I would just show you that video. Sorry, it's a bit of a marketing video that was put together by the client, but it does give you an overall impression of the size of the development and some of its key components. Here you can see the buildings on the skyline of Toronto, very much sitting in the central business district. As you can see here, the landmark, obviously CN Tower in the background and the lake in the foreground. But Toronto itself going through a massive boom. This is a crane count index. You can see here Toronto, 124, Chicago 14, and you can see some of the other American cities there. It really just gives you an idea of the boom that is taking place in Toronto at the moment, which has really kind of spurred the project on. Just a bit of a geography lesson. Toronto on Lake Ontario, you can see here on the eastern seaboard, effectively very close to New York, really, and the other big cities around the lakes, Chicago, Cleveland, as you can see there. Zooming in a bit more into Toronto itself, you can see this is the central business district here with the density and of the high rises and the shadows that they're creating. And a couple of dominant lines running through here. This is the rail corridor connecting into Toronto's Union Station, which is here, and then the Gardiner Expressway, a freeway running along the length of the lake. And then this is the inner harbor here with what was the old dock line in the aerial you can see there. And a couple of historical maps, or one historical map actually on the left there, Toronto in the 1840s, our site edged in blue. So you can see that our site previously would have been in the lake. So over that time, a lot of reclamation of the edge of the lake. And really then that reclamation is indicated on the right drawing over here. This is the site you can see here. And so really the central business district now some distance from the lake and really separated from it by, as I mentioned, the rail corridor running into Union Station and the Gardiner Expressway. And indeed, you can see an image here from, I think this was the late 60s, central business district with the Mies Tower really looking like a kind of alien spaceship landing in Toronto at the time. And then that reclaimed land really being used for industrial use and transportation, and very industrial it was, with warehouses on the lakeshore. So really with that as a context, our site can be seen here, edged in white. The rail corridor, you'll notice, goes right through the middle of the site, and the Gardiner Expressway edges the southern edge of the site. This is the CN Tower just here, and that's the Blue Jays Stadium, the Rogers Centre on where I'm circling on the left. And this is Union Station, Toronto Union Station, a Victorian listed building, effectively the Toronto, Canada's largest rail station. So our project really is an integrated transport development. It's a TOD. We plug into and utilize a transport system in a very sort of fundamental way. Excuse me. And you can see here an aerial view of our two sites, 81 Bay, which is the southern site, hemmed in by the Gardiner Freeway to the south and the rail corridor to the north, and 141 Bay to the north here, right next to Union Station, the site of the current city's bus terminal, and really one of the drivers for Metrolinx being part of the development team, but also a requirement to relocate that bus terminal, a live bus terminal, into the South Tower podium, which I'll come on to. Interesting, 81 Bays is adjacent to the Scotiabank Arena, the ice hockey stadium, which is as important to the Torontonians as Wembley perhaps is to Londoners and Englanders. And you can see how close the central business district is. This is Bay Street, Toronto's premier financial street that effectively ran down to the rail corridor and stopped. The rail corridor itself providing a very significant break in the continuity of that street as it works its way down to the lake. The other thing to note, I suppose, is that what's happened in recent times is that development has jumped the tracks, but not office development per se, mainly residential. So residential has jumped to the southern side of the tracks and is now forming an edge to the lake itself. So going through some of the components of the project, divided into phases because of the scale of the project. The first project, 81 Bay, the South Tower. You can see here the tower where I'm circling on top of a podium that is very mixed use and complex in its nature. At the moment, due to CIBC and tenant changes, we're designing auditorium spaces in the upper levels of the podium. Originally, they were going to be high density or trading floors. There is also at ground floor, there's a big arrival plaza that is the face of the tower and the podium and the development onto Bay Street. On level 4, which is the level where the Sky Park comes into the tower, we have about 60,000 square feet of amenities. We have a huge food hall, and we have a series of specialist restaurants, and there's a gym, and really very much a flavor of modern office development around the world, a building rich in amenities for the tenants and in some cases for the benefit of the wider population. Also in the podium, I mentioned we were relocating the bus terminal, which is currently on the 141 Bay site. That's coming over and being housed in the podium in a 2-story structure. And then the Sky Park itself, as I mentioned, spanning across the rail corridor. This is the rail corridor here into Union Station. The roofs of the rail corridor, the roofs of the platforms are down to be greened. So the idea is that there will be a sort of green expanse of 5 acres, I believe, of greened roof over the platforms. And our Sky Park effectively forms a usable full stop to that green corridor. And as part of phase 1, the Sky Park stops short of the 141 plot in itself for reasons of practicality and construction, but a huge technical challenge for our engineers, RJC, who had to deal with a sort of wobbly park that was unrestrained at the time. Again, another theme that we're seeing around the world in the buildings we're doing is the use of integration of terraces. So big terraces came into the project when CIBC took the buildings. Originally, they were designed as part of the project back in, when we started design back in 2015. And those were removed at the time. They weren't felt to be desirable to tenants, and how the world has changed in that respect very quickly. So we've been populating and taking over roof space to create terraces since then. I mentioned the connectivity. The building is very much integrated into the wider city, a series of bridges, path bridges as they're called. The path system is a pedestrian network that winds its way through the central business district, allowing the public to escape the worst of the Toronto winters and connect into office developments. Pretty much all developments these days will accept and allow the path system to come through them, and we're no different. So we connect as part of the first phase across to the Scotiabank Arena, which has a connection into Union Station, and we also connect eastwards to continue the system to the next development. And then below the rail corridor itself, there's another transit space which effectively connects both towers' lobbies together, and we're upgrading that space, and it's called a teamway. And that teamway is a transit space that allows passengers, commuters to wait in a climatically controlled environment with no display screens, etc. And then when their train has arrived, they then go up stairs and elevators up onto the platforms above, which are protected by canopies, but are obviously open to the elements otherwise. So we've done a fundamental upgrade of that to make it an appropriate threshold space to our grade A lobbies. The second phase that's just started on site this year, we've now relocated the bus terminal into the podium of the South Tower. We've cleared the site and we're building the second 250-meter tower, 55 stories. We'll extend the park into that tower. And again, we'll build another large podium for that building, which will contain trading for CIBC, about 150,000 square feet of trading. A series of new urban realm spaces supported by retail and F&B along their flanks, and a lobby you can see here, and then further path bridges that connect across to Union Station directly into the historic fabric of Union Station, and again out eastwards into the residential developments you can see here. So comprehensively connecting into the city, and very complex in terms of those connectivities. We also connect into the light rail system that runs along and up Bay Street, and we provide provision for a series of stations that our basements will allow access into the platforms. In terms of the master plan, it is a massive development. It's kind of city changing, or certainly neighborhood changing in the scale of it. And the project seeks to jump the rail corridor that I mentioned before historically has been a bit of a scar, dislocating the central business district from the lake. So our project attempts to bridge that rail corridor with the Sky Bridge, the Sky Park, but also the upgrade to the teamway below the track. So it's an above and below ground sort of attack strategy. But the size of the project means the urban realm was incredibly important. So key to our master plan was the development of a series of plaza spaces, 3 in fact, that key the 2 towers into Bay Street, either side of the rail corridor, and of Yonge Street, as you can see here, Yonge Street being Toronto's premier retail street. Those 3 plazas are connected via laneways, the connections I just mentioned, and the Sky Park, to create a kind of triangulation of the project and to lock it into the city fabric, and also to push the towers back from the street frontages and to create breathing space. So a visual of the scheme as we conceived it during the design stages, the 2 towers that I've talked about with their very distinctive folded facade, facades that are very unusual in the Toronto context, and I'll talk more about those. And the Sky Park itself, you can see here, connecting the towers and their amenity levels that have been gathered at level 4. I've mentioned the 60,000 square foot food court in the South Tower. There's a similar food and beverage offering at that level in the North Tower. And I'll go on to talk briefly about what else is happening in the park to activate the park as well. And really that park is acting in a way to create a campus feel for the 2 towers, the way that they address each other, but it's also providing useful acoustic screening to the rail corridor and visual screening. So it's not only a sort of benevolent issue, it's a $50 million deck that is working quite hard on a number of levels, but actually is a park on another level. You can see that what that park does though, by being effectively 25 meters above ground, is it creates lobbies that are very tall. So we have designed a series of sky lobbies that relate to the park in terms of its datum, and then we have a lower level to the lobby. So our lobbies are 25 meters high, so very impressive again in the Toronto condition. But one of the things that struck me when I went to Toronto for the first site visit back in 2014 was this view of the central business district as it was in those days. A business district really defined by those early Mies buildings that you can see in the center here, and that first one I showed you in that earlier image. Buildings predominantly characterized by rectangular floor plates, which is really what the market drives, particularly its finance and banking dominance. And towers that really are expressed as a series of floor slabs and spandrels and therefore ribbon windows. Very flat facades on the whole, and a sort of uniformity and irregularity to it. So our approach really was then to try and create an architecture that was really took on the dialogue to the next level, and created an architecture that was different to what we saw before, and as I say, was a development, a progression of that architecture as we saw it, and an architecture that strove to create a vertical scale and massing to the appearance of the towers rather than these sort of series of uniform blocks. So this is the standard building block of those towers, the rectangular floor plate, very much with the horizontals expressed floor by floor. What we did is we introduced a series of vertical cuts on the corners and the center of the floor plate to effectively hive off and create the appearance of 2 volumes. This is not only for architectural reasons to slim down the volume. These are 70 meters typically faces by 35, but it also creates corner offices, something that the Toronto market and Hines in particular feel brings real value to their floor plates. Having introduced those articulated corners, we then slip the 2 volumes, again to reinforce the idea of reading of two volumes. And then we added this expressive skin to give a vertical scale to the facades of the towers, and a modulation and a repeating modulation on a 10-story module, and a 3-dimensionality to it, something that hasn't been seen before in Toronto, to create a real vibrancy about the facades that catch the light in a very unusual and dynamic way. And you can see then the reading of the facades as skins, really lightweight skins attached to these rectangular, uniform, regular shapes. And you can see how that works on the skyline. as a standout from the other towers that you see there to the right. But just a walk through the building. This is the South Tower. The base of the building, these 24 meter high lobbies that I mentioned with the sky lobby part of the way up. Behind that, the podium working very hard with 2 levels of bus terminal, a plant level to separate that usage, and then the amenity floor lining through with the Sky Park and the amenities I've already talked about. And above that, the podium of office use, now being used for auditorium spaces for CIBC, and then a 3-story basement car parking. So unlike the UK, still lots of basement parking being constructed in the towers in Toronto, and then the main office element sitting above. So just working then from the base of the tower upwards. This is a view up Bay Street looking northwards. This is the South Tower. The corner element, this will now be the bank branch for CIBC on the corner. The Gardiner Expressway is just to our right. And you can see the large new public space, which is the threshold space with a big porte cochere over the top into the lobby. So a building giving a certain scale to the street, and the canopy lining through with the massing of the Toronto Post building next door, which is actually the Scotiabank Arena that I mentioned. And you can see in the distance there, one of the bridges, new bridges, path bridges connecting into that Scotiabank Arena, and the Sky Park in the distance. So this is the South Tower Plaza with the lobby in the background. The idea that we wanted to define a space, a plaza, with the introduction of a porte cochere over the top, a 24 meter high, very dramatic porte cochere, acting to deal with the downdraft, but to define a space in architectural terms, and also to imply a space that had multiple uses. So here you can see a stair connecting up to the park above, but also we have entry points into the transport system to the left there. That's the South Portal, which allows access into the Teamway and up onto the platforms of Union Station. And in the background, the lobby itself with the Sky Lobby at the upper level linking into the park. And this is the plaza with the porte cochere over the top and the stairs up into the Sky Park in the distance. And this is the bridge coming across from the arena, and a view into the lobby through the glass. And a under construction image of looking up Bay Street. So the canopy and the lobby very much as those initial renders envisaged them to be. You can see the stair under construction linking up to the park, and the bridge now finished and open with art pieces in the background by local artists. Moving into the lobby, characteristic by these large volumes. This is the Sky Lobby sitting above, and then these are the main elevator banks, lift banks that you can see here. The core clad in stone and travertine, very much homage to the original Mies buildings, the banking buildings that really kicked off the financial district. In a way, we're kind of underpinning it at the other end and to the modern era. The lobby is raised from the street. Again, a device that Mies was using up at those original buildings in the central business district. And we've done something interesting with the stone. We've created this 3-dimensional pattern, which is again a triangulated pattern, a reference back to the triangles and the diamonds that are a bit of an underlying theme to the building. And this is the lobby, still under construction, but nevertheless you get an idea of it as a space. And at the ends of the lobbies, massive art pieces by a local artist. I keep wanting to say architect, apologies. Artist called Stephen Driscoll. These are 16-meter high pieces of art, and there's one of those in each of these lobbies. And Canada still does the 1% for art, so you can imagine we have a pretty generous art budget for this building. And that's a view of the art pieces, which will be lit when the building's fully commissioned and opened. So they will glow. You can see here the 3-dimensionality of the travertine. So moving up the building, get effectively to the real working heart of the building, the floor plates themselves. I mentioned the requirement for the rectangular floor plates that Toronto has as a sort of financial market. These floor plates are pretty big. They're about 32,000 square feet gross, netting down to about 25,000 square feet, and 4 banks of 8 lifts, serving a series of zones up the building. I'll talk more about those shortly. But a floor plate that again is driven by the local market. Very much the standard is a 42'6" leaf span, or about 12.5 meters, primarily along the long elevations. And you can see here the corners that we've nipped out of the floor plate to create these double corner office potentials around the floor plate itself. And as part of the design process, lots of space planning to make sure everything worked, and indeed the amount of folding that the facades effectively now do and have been constructed, very much an output of space studies, space planning to define a kind of suitable amount of fold, not to restrict space planning flexibility. And some renders done back in the day to show the office environment before it was taken on and properly fitted out by another architect in the end. And even in those days, back in 2015-16, looking to create a range of spaces. So these are some of the upper levels, the executive levels, with amazing views of the lake, effectively looking out over the sea. And the office floor, generous in terms of floor to floor, 4.1 meters floor to floor to achieve 2.9 clear, and unusual to Toronto in those days. We were looking to use it. Well, we ended up using a steel structure with a concrete core. We did do an alternative solution that looked at a concrete frame, which is much more the market at the time in Toronto. It has changed actually over those years, but a sandwich build up for the floor zone, which is generous. Services sit underneath structure, not coordinated into any structural depth. So everything, they talk about clear fly zones. And we managed to get the facade to be one piece of glass, 4.1 meters floor to floor. Again, something that was quite unusual at the time. They wanted to break the glass modules. So I'll talk about that shortly, for economic reasons. But not so dissimilar to what you'd see in the UK, I guess. An extract from RJC, the structural engineer's drawings, concrete core in the center, and a very sort of rational series of steel beams coming from that core. And you can see in this image how that floor sandwich is put together. And as I say, the service is sitting below the structure, and a ceiling below that. Interestingly, a lot of the fit out now, even though this is a banking building, the ceilings have been removed and the services are left exposed. Be interesting to see how that turns out, seeing the local market isn't necessarily to set them out in a beautiful fashion because they're not normally exposed. So there you go. We spent a lot of time as well looking at how the folded facade would interact with partitioning systems and to get everybody comfortable that there was no flexibility impaired with what we were doing. And just showed this just to show that this is one of the trading floors in the North Tower. So a really big floor, about 60,000 square feet, I believe, in gross terms. Seat count of about nearly 500 on this floor. And there's several floors of this in the North Tower. Vertical transportation. They call them elevators, so I'm now increasingly calling them elevators, not lifts. I've already mentioned 4 banks of 8. Certainly in North America, there's no sky lobbies, and not that you necessarily need one in a building of this height, but everything's direct ascent from the lobby. So the core is quite big, I guess, or is quite large. The cars themselves are quite big as well. For those of you that do high-rise design, you know that the core is clearly one of the most crucial aspects in the structure. The structure forming the backbone and everything really dancing around that. So you can see here a sort of diagram really to show that whilst the structure clearly has to run through in terms of lift lobbies, etc. As lift lobbies drop off, washrooms come into play. Washrooms sit inside unused lift shafts or lift lobbies, as you can see here. Once the lifts come into use, then the washrooms drop off and need to transfer. The brown are staircases, so escape stairs that also have to dance around the moving washrooms and moving lift banks. So it's a real three-dimensional dance to try and get an efficiency and a usability to the core. And our strategy was to step the lifts back away from the west to benefit from the views as you got higher up the building. Washroom design, well, sorry, it's a bit dry, but the washrooms very much in the North American model sit within the core. They sit within the unused lift lobbies, and that's a standard throughout the world, I guess. The washroom provision isn't as onerous as in the UK. They have got some more onerous elements that have come in, but the count is much lower than in the UK. So this here is the disabled changing space. It's a vast space. We have one of those on every other floor throughout the core that we need to deal with. But one of the other things that the washrooms in North America have done to this point is introduce stalls, as they call them, stalls that have very big doors that are cut very high up from the ground, 24 inches typically Heinz would use, 24 inches down from the top. So you can see cowboy boots and guns in holsters lined up in the stalls as you walk past. But one of the things we want to do is to bring more of a London feel, more of a sort of international banking feel to these spaces. And we had some interesting conversations about creating country club washrooms, as they were being called, i.e. having doors that came down to the ground. In the end, we sort of met halfway, and we ended up with doors slightly raised from the ground and down from the top. But I think you can see here quite a clean washroom space, and it's one of the early renders, and still successful nevertheless. Facade design, well, one of the major components of the project, giving its identity and its status on the Toronto skyline. This repeating diamond pattern every 10 stories, folding about 750 mil from a datum outwards to a point, and constructed by effectively adding a steel build out to a standard rectangular floor. The tower itself expressed as a tower on a podium. This is the south elevation on the right here with the bus terminal with the big white sort of shoji screen. And then we generally like to try and have a crown to our towers. So expressing the crown of the building differently and in a kind of dramatic way, plant rooms sitting behind those big screens. And then the expression of the diamonds with external fins to really reinforce the three-dimensional geometry. I mentioned the fact that the crown of the building oversails, goes up, and it usefully hides the plant spaces, which are pretty enormous. In this tower, 55 stories, in both towers, in fact, the plant rooms sit both at the top of the building and then right down at the base. There's no intermediate plant floors in this part of the world, and they sort of thought I was mental to be suggesting that we would have intermediate plant floors. So here you can see the facades and the offices through the glass. All the mullions are vertical, as you'd expect. They do no doubt on some of the floors, but it's nothing that's caused anybody any concern. It's an interesting kind of feature. You can see already when sort of 18 months ago, when the cladding started to go in, you started to get the impression of that facade and how successful it was going to be, and it was very, very similar to our vision for how we saw it to be. You can see the facade going on to the floors that have had the concrete toppings poured, and then the steelwork above and the core in the middle. So it's a very traditional way of constructing towers, as most of you will know. It's a jump form structure at the top, which jumped every two weeks, I believe, and got a bit faster as they got more used to it. You can see here the jump form already starting to split and move upwards. So it was onto the next cycle. And as I mentioned, as the facade went up, the drama of the facades only starting to become even clearer that it was going to be something quite unique to Toronto. And then this is a recent snap off a sort of website that's following our project very closely. Urban Toronto, it's called. If any of you are interested, go on it. It's a really interesting website that tracks all of the buildings that are being built in Toronto, and there's a lot of them by quite a lot of British architects, actually. Feature lighting, very important to the overall look of the building, but not so important that it should dominate the building in a North American market. Having worked in China, it's in a way the other way around. In China, the more the better. If you can make the building brighter and stand out against its peers, you only get higher marks. Here, there's definitely a subtlety that was required. We wanted to light the diamonds in a very subtle, elegant way, and then introduce a little bit of lighting to light the crown at the top of the tower. We came up with the idea of grazing the fins that form the diamonds, almost like a lightsaber that you can see here. So the light actually trails away as it extends beyond the nodal point. So lights at the nodal points, light grazing away from those points. And then some Instagram images. This is where we turned the lighting up to full to test it. And I think half of Toronto were shocked and in awe, and the other half were going, well, that's interesting. Anyway, we turned it down once we'd got a measure of it. And this is a recent image of it. I think it's really successful, actually. You can see here how excuse me. You can see here how the nodal points gently catch the light and graze. The fins are being grazed by the light, and then the lantern, as we call it in the crown, is again nicely lit and fading away, graduating up into the sky. Urban realm, a really important aspect of the project. We've talked about the Sky Park connecting the towers together to create this campus feeling. The amenities feeding in from either side into that Sky Park. The Sky Park designed to provide functionality throughout the year, throughout the summer, and also into the winter, given the length of Toronto's winter. And therefore a park that has both hard and soft landscaping. The amenities, as I mentioned, address the park fully. So lots of F&B, hopefully to enliven the park, and I'm sure they will. There's an ice rink that's been designed up there, so the park will cater for an ice rink and all the things that come with an ice rink. You won't believe the amount of things that come with an ice rink, not just a hose and some water and wait for it to freeze. And you can see here just an urban realm diagram. This is the Sky Park, and we very much wanted the urban realm to be the glue to tie the towers together and to reinforce the idea of a coherent piece of public realm and urban realm. And you can see here the Sky Park effectively folding down into the site of the North Tower. So this is the 141 site. This is the site currently is the bus terminal. Well, it was up to Christmas, and the creation of a new laneway, which is a Toronto street, a small street, typically lined with interesting shops, boutique shops, and F&B outlets, and we've created a sort of modern version of that along the side of our project. And that's just a render of it with the lobby of the North Tower to the right there through a very transparent wall. And moving to the North Tower, just quickly, this is a really complicated tower, the North Tower. This tower effectively has its core wedged up to the rail corridor, and we can't take any structure down into the rail corridor to the right of this image. So the building structure effectively comes down and cantilevers, sorry, not cantilevers, it actually is transferred back to the core with these raking columns, as you can see here, to avoid dropping columns as they would need to otherwise into the rail corridor, which is live. So you end up with a tower that's 250 meters tall, sitting on a series of inclined columns that then go back to a very thin core. We do have outriggers and a stability structure at the top, but what that does for us as architects is it creates a lobby with no columns, which is pretty unique. It was hard work for RJC, although we set a difficult challenge and they rose to it well. How you then get the structure for such a big tower to come back to the core only and to be stable and safe was quite a feat of engineering. And that's the output for the architecture, a lobby that is 70 meters long and 25 meters high, no columns in it. And you can see here we're using a cable system deliberately, actually, because the tower is swaying and the cable system is kind of going with that movement. We've got train springs from locomotives that are tensioning those cables to allow for the sway of the building and to keep the glass tensioned. So again, it should be an amazing and very dramatic space. And those inclined columns work their way up to the sky lobby, which this image is showing. So as well as the main towers themselves, there are a whole series of transit spaces that we've gone into, reformed, renovated, and created. This is the teamway that sits below the rail corridor. And this is the space where Torontonians wait for their trains to go home in the evening. There's going to be F&B in here. It's all been newly insulated. We've stopped the rain coming in, and we've put new finishes in and new information systems. And it's it's just trying to be a modern transport space. It hasn't ever been upgraded in recent years. Well, so recent times. The other one I mentioned was the bus terminal. The bus terminal opened just before Christmas, which allowed us to start demolition of the old bus terminal in the North Tower site. Deliberately, we've positioned the bus terminal adjacent to the Gardner Expressway to deal with that quite aggressive environment. It wasn't a place where we felt we could put office space. So introducing the bus terminal at that location, we felt was an appropriate foil to the Gardner. And you can see here the buses going into the terminal and the passengers on the left there. And it really helped to sort of model the podium in an interesting way to create this kind of secondary building effectively integrated into the podium. And the bus terminal itself is more like an airport. When it's these are recent photographs, but because of COVID and Toronto's in a lockdown, it's not being used as you'd expect very much. But certainly the ambition is to take bus use to the kind of next level. So it is more like using an airport terminal. Clearly, we were conscious that we have a grade A series of office lobbies adjacent to this bus terminal. Certainly the South Tower has its main lobby just along this transit space at the end there. And there was some nervousness initially about mixing those uses so closely. And hence there's a real quality to these spaces now. And again, you can see this is a space during lockdown, quiet, but it's much more it's a big space and it's on two levels. So there's two waiting spaces stacked on top of each other. I mentioned the path bridges, so we connect the development into the rest of the city, into the fabric in adjacent sites. The Scotiabank Arena Bridge, during the course of the project, Scotiabank changed its name from the Air Canada Centre to the Scotiabank Arena. So we had to change all our drawings to show Scotiabank Arena. This is the bridge going in, being craned in. This is new structure on the right. This is the South Portal, which takes the park and some of the massive trusses that support the park. And then we bridge through that and into the Scotiabank Arena over Bay Street. At the same time, we're tidying up that fascia, which is the existing rail corridor fascia that you see there. So the connectivity was something that the whole team wanted. We wanted to connect the building into these path networks. It generally adds values to the developments in Toronto. The footfall is good for the F&B and the retail, and clearly this being a transit orientated development, we wanted to get the ease of movement from the tenants and the use of the building into the transport system as straightforward as and intuitively as possible, and these bridges are helping that. And this was a recent photograph under construction. The bridge is now open and live. There is feature lighting to go in, but it's a very simple bridge in this case across Bay Street. The Union Station Bridge, which is the other side of the tracks, which relates to the 141 project, is a much more is a much different challenge. We are effectively bridging from left to right into the side of Union Station, this heritage Victorian building, across a heritage metal fascia to Union Station behind there. This is a listed structure. We weren't allowed to touch it. And actually that's a good thing. We really wanted to kind of celebrate that fascia, and the design is effectively to create a showcase. It's north facing, so it's not getting direct sunlight. So we have very clear glass, and we try to create a showcase, display case for that renovated fascia into Union Station, and create a very clean connection into Union Station on the right there. This is the lobby of the North Tower, as you can see here. And this is the North Portal, which provides escalator access up into the Sky Park and access off the bridge and into the lobby as Bay Street in the distance. And that's a view approaching Union Station along the bridge with the heritage fascia on the right, on the left there, sorry. And then sort of into the last straights now. During construction. So this is the site of the 141 tower, the North Tower. This was the old bus station. It was still being used when these shots were taken. Obviously, this is the park that had stopped as part of the first phase. Sort of not quite mid-span, but hadn't quite reached its goal yet. But you can see the cladding going on and the core going up. And then sort of more advanced during the construction stage, the podium now complete, the Sky Park with its topping and the restaurant and F&B fronting it, and the tower approaching the crown, construction of the crown at the top. This is the plant room structure and the crown structure going in. And you can see it's really starting to be very effective in terms of how the facades are working and the breaking down of the massing with the various articulations that we did. And a more recent photograph, the tower effectively finished from the outside, the skin now fully in place. The success really, I think, of catching the light in a really interesting and dynamic way, the reading of two co-joined towers and the reading of the skin lightly touching an inner form that you can see with these recessed corners. And then the podium at the lower level with green roofs. So in Toronto, you need to green every available roof to hit the green code. So every roof is greened in some way. If it's not green, then it's a terrace that I mentioned that we're now using for CIBC typically. This is Union Station to the right here with the station canopies, not yet with their green topping applied. And this is the park, which hopefully will become that green full stop, publicly accessible park that will because of its location, won't be ever overshadowed by the tall buildings. West facing, have a great view of the city of Toronto. And then this is a construction time lapse. Okay, thank you. That finishes my quick walk through CIBC Toronto. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Amazing, Dominic. Incredibly complex project, and
Yeah.
I look at this and I look at the constraints that you faced, and coming from Toronto, coming to London, here we face a lot of constraints with sewers and tunnels, but that is equally as difficult.
Yes, I mean, it was a really massive challenge, and so many sites in North America actually are just single sites, and you just build a building and move on to the next one. But this is so interconnected. It's quite a different mega project, really.
Absolutely, and this is actually a good follow into first question we got from Andy Levy. From a people perspective, how many individual WilkinsonEyre architects are currently working on the project, and many throughout the project so far? And obviously a mega project so big, I can't imagine myself how many architects are working on this.
I didn't hear the first bit. Did you say how many staff?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we were the design architects, so we led the project up to the completion of DD, which is about a stage 3 RIBA. And we had a team of about 30 architects, all split up into different parts of the building, with more senior ones then coordinating the activities. So we had a team looking at the urban realm, team doing the core, etc., etc. We then, at construction documents, handed over to Adamson's, who were the local executive architect, who were fantastic. They did the construction documents, and we then commented and stuck our noses in generally when we weren't asked to. And we had a much smaller team then, probably about 7 or 8. The team then, just steps down throughout the process. But I was going to Canada every other week for 18 months for the first tower, and then 18 months for the second tower. So a lot of traveling, but I couldn't persuade my wife to move to Toronto. Too cold for her.
Too cold. The winters are too cold.
So I did the flights.
I can speak from experience. Yeah.
So these big projects need big teams, but they're reasonably short hits. I mean, compared to our Battersea team is also about 30, but they've been 30 for about 7 years, because we're doing everything from beginnings of the project, the concept, through to construction delivery.
Great. Next question from Andy Pye, and I think you came on to answer this question in part, but he says, "Great scheme, Dominic. Thank you for sharing. I'm curious about whether or not there was ever discussion of extending the office development over the railway, similar to Hudson Yards." And in your slides, you showed how you did come out over the railway, but maybe, perhaps why was the limit taken there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, originally, and if you were eagle-eyed, you may have noticed it, that we did have a retail mall over the tracks. The client is partly an office developer, partly a retail developer, and the thought was we'd have 2 towers and a big retail mall between. And we went quite a long way down the route of designing that, but the technical challenges of servicing retail 25 meters up in the air, getting people up to the retail 25 meters up in the air, fire escapes, etc., and the sheer cost of that meant that we could have bought a piece of land directly next to us in the central business district and still have been cheaper. So what the idea of putting an office on that live rail corridor was, I think, literally a bridge too far. There's certain lines that run through there 24 hours a day, some of the Canadian freight, CN, and I just think it would have been too expensive in this situation. I mean, it's funny, this has kicked off a number of other developers now looking at bridging over the tracks. You can see the rail corridor here extending westwards, and that's the Sky Dome in the distance. There are a number of schemes coming forward now to deck over the tracks. I'm not sure if anybody actually sits on the tracks, and in fact, I'm a Council for Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats judge on the Urban Realm Awards, and looking at Hudson's Yards, I think a lot of it actually is deck and parkland over the actual rail. I might be wrong, but I think again they had a similar strategy: cantilever over as much as you can, but don't actually build big towers on the rail corridor. Just the challenge of the core and the structure are too significant, I think.
Great, great. A question from anonymous attendee. Did you do anything to minimize cooling loads, considering that it looks like it's full height glazing on every facade? And this is an interesting question. There's a lot of glazed residential buildings, high-rise residential buildings in Toronto as well. So it'd be interesting just to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, there is a pretty substantial fully insulated spandrel, but it's hidden and it's color coded or colored out so that you can't see it on the facades. So we do have the spandrel to help, and obviously the glass has quite a high performance coating to it. So beyond that, no, we did look at double skins right back at the beginning, but there was a cost aspect to that just made it unviable in this market. I think things are changing in Toronto, and there's a willingness to pay for more environmental benefits. But certainly the office market in Toronto is driven by full height glass, as arguably it still is here in London and other parts of the world. Sydney, Melbourne, where other places where we're building, there's an expectation for that full height glass.
Okay, from Catherine Edwards. Apart from the washroom provisions, which you mentioned, are there any other major differences between Canadian and UK building regulations / expectations which you had to grapple with? Are Canadian regs more or less accommodating than UK? A code question for you.
Oh, crikey. Well, we had a code consultant. It's the way they do it in Canada. So you work with them, and actually, typically, it's all done by code and not by performance, particularly on the fire. So there's not a lot of wriggle room in terms of what you can and can't do. So all the fire code is all very prescriptive. There's no fire engineering as such. Fire's similar. There's a little bit more leniency on the travel distances from memory, but otherwise very similar. What else? I think there's more of a, I mean, on the energy side, there's definitely a focus on trying to make the equipment more efficient rather than necessarily passive means of keeping the building, low energy. I think we talked the other day about something I heard being mentioned, that there's a reluctance in the market, and I'm sure this is going to change. There's a reluctance to go for all electric towers because there's big energy tariff rebates available if you can unhook from the grid for a certain number of days of the year. And that was driven originally to encourage people to use renewables. But what it means is that people are turning on their generators, their standby generators, to run the towers, obviously generating CO2 to save on their electric bill. So there's a few funny little idiosyncratic things like that. I guess that all markets have some similar loopholes that people are playing into. But no, long answer to a short question. Nothing significant I can think of that would, other than the washrooms and etc.
Okay. And a question from Robin. Hi, Dominic, a fantastic building, and thank you for a great presentation, and one which was on my Toronto tour if the conference had gone ahead. Tell me, since the advent of COVID, has the client asked you to make any changes to the building? Any regs from Robin, BCO president?
Thanks, Robin. No, the client is on a breakneck mission to finish the building, the first phase in July for CIBC to take the first tower. So I think they're they're fully focused on finishing delivery for the first tower, given the challenges of COVID. And we had a big strike during the construction by the metal workers. So that added some stress into the program, shall we say. The North Tower, nothing yet, but there's constant CIBC adjustments to the design, shall we say. CIBC have very onerous internal requirements on washrooms and adding layers and layers of improving legislation, if you like, improving on legislation for their own employees. So there's been constant rounds of upgrades that's taken place for them. No doubt, I suspect we will be getting ones coming through from COVID, but in fairness to Adamson's, they've been dealing with most of those issues as they're local and on the ground.
And one last question, and one selfishly from myself. What is the MEP strategy? Plant rooms and a raised floor for power and IT weren't evident in the section.
So it's all fan coils on the floor, and you have there's an on-floor unit, and then there's some dirty grate risers that then link up to the plant on the roof, and we've got like a 50,000 square foot plant floor at level 3 in the base of the podium, and then we've got, probably you can just see it in here in this image, we've got about 5 stories of plant, heat rejection, BMUs at the top of the building, and then big risers connecting up and down the building. So it is quite different to the UK. There's no intermediate plant floors. There's none of the kind of louvering that you'd expect halfway at the tower. There's no fire refuges that you'd get in China that would also create articulation up the height of the building. So yeah. Is that the right answer? You probably know better than me, Chris. You're a Torontonian.
I am, but not so good with MEP stuff, to be honest. My last question. So you might know, Dominic, Canada is very focused on vehicles. Because everything's so far apart, you effectively almost need a car to get places. Otherwise, you have to take the bus, and it'll take hours. And so Canada being very vehicle focused, I'm curious to know what your design decisions were surrounding, cycle storage in the building. Is Toronto trying to push the agenda a little more? And then also, I know you worked in Hong Kong for a long time, and I would imagine, cycling being there as well. So just getting your opinion on the differences and what they're doing and what you're seeing.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, there's pretty big basements in both towers. Actually, I think there's 5-story basements in the North Tower and 3-story basements in the South Tower. Very little of that is used for plant, which we would do in the UK. As I said, the plant is in the podium, so that's all predominantly car parking. And the thinking was that if the staff were not necessarily all driving in, because we sit over a massive transport hub, then any parking could be used as overflow for the Scotiabank arena, and the city were allowing them to trade spaces and do that. So there's definitely nothing in code preventing them from building big basements to store cars. There wasn't a massive emphasis on bicycles and bicycle storage, and certainly none of the massive focus that we have here on producing and providing best-in-class end-of-trip facilities. So there are cycle changing in the basement. I don't think they're as similar to here. I mean, we actually, to be honest with you, we didn't design them. The Adamsons were looking after the basement. They were doing the glamorous bits. But it's nowhere near a driver as it's here. And I'm doing one in Melbourne at the moment, and that is all about end of trip. The EOT, half of the basement is end of trip facilities for cyclists, as is the case here in London, where we're doing a tower in the city, and it's the same issue there. Plant and cycle stores are what basements afford these days. In Hong Kong, because the traffic's so deadly and there's so much and it's dense, there isn't a lot of cycling. I mean, I cycle every day here in London, and I lived in Hong Kong and never cycled once. I think it's too dangerous. So they've got some way to go. And what was the other country you mentioned? Yeah, well, I was going to say Australia. I've already mentioned it, that they're obviously very focused on cycling and providing good end-of-trip facilities.
So that's really interesting. I think Canada has a bit of a ways to go on the cycling, but obviously the winters are cold, and when there's a lot of snow, you can't really get your bike.
There's quite a few of the Adamsons guys used to cycle in, but they were quite brave, and they'd do it in the winter. But you've got the trams as well, which look a bit lethal to me on a bike and a tram. Anyway.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we're over time, so I think we'll call it there. Dominic, a massive thank you to you. Thanks for
Pleasure.
Time. Really, really interesting project. Very complicated. So thank you. Thank you to all the viewers, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next event. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully I can show you the development when it's completed in about 4 years' time.
Absolutely.